This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period. Oh, no, hold on. No, at some point, report the facts. The facts are that every single person who has been briefed on this subject has come away with the same conclusion. Republican, Democrat, so I'm sorry that disgusts you. Hold on. Let me, and I am trying to answer your question, Jonathan, if you can calm down. If the president puts Russian salad dressing on his salad tonight, somehow that's a Russian connection.
Joining me now, former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer. His book, now out, is called The Briefing, Politics, the Press, and the President. Sean, good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you for that.
Isn't it fun
stroll down
all
memory lane?
what do you feel? I want to know what your gut feels like every time you watch that again.
Depends which clip. It reminds me of the intensity of the job. Mm-hmm. It was an unbelievable honor to do that on behalf of this president, this country. But it takes one set of clips like that to remind me that I'm glad Sarah's in front of the podium now, and I get to spend a little more time with my
You used to say, it's not about palace intrigue. No one cares about palace intrigue. But isn't that what you're telling us here, the palace intrigue?
No, I don't think so at all. I think part of it is to give people the context to what was happening on some of those key and pivotal moments, and a look behind the scenes. For so many people, myself included, growing up, I was wanting to know what's it really like in the White House? How is a campaign going? And the pace of what the Trump campaign and candidacy was all about, that just led into this historic transition in the White House. There was not a lot of time for people who really were witness to all of that to pause and to talk about what was going on, because there was always something next. I was able to sit back and hopefully for the reader, recreate some of the historic nature of what was happening, whether it's the convention, the campaign, the debates, all of those things, and kind of walk people through the uniqueness of what just happened.
So let me ask you this, because, obviously, I don't think there's any more important communications director in the White House than the president.
Yes.
I mean, he's a message guy, and he understands the message and how to get it out to people. But did you think, when you took the job, that he would change a little bit when he got into the White House?
To some degree, I guess, we always thought, everybody thinks that the office weighs heavy on an individual.
Sure.
And every president has talked about how the office changes them. You see things and become privy to things that you never knew, and it weighs heavy on your decision-making process. But I think, to your point, we, and I in particular, approach this in a very traditional sense. I talked to my predecessors on a bipartisan basis and really thought of approaching the job in the way that a lot of them have, and not recognizing how unique Donald Trump was. He's not a politician. He's a businessman. He's he's a negotiator, and he's not looking to do it the way that everybody else has. He wants to get results.
But the communications department goes through all these different evolutions, and they're still trying to get out in front of the president and line up, with the message and pull it off. So, I mean, what do you say from the outside, looking back at them?
I think part of the reason that I was able to talk about some of the things that happened in this book is to take people through how that dynamic has changed, and how, yes, you're right. It used to be that you would set up and execute this strategy, and then the president would sign off on it, and then you would execute it. Now, he's the communicator in chief. He decides what he's going to do, and we fall in line, and the job is to get out there and echo and amplify the message that he has.
One specific question. Did you get shut out of the Pope meeting?
No, it's really interesting. It's all in here. I think there's a really great story about faith and patience in there. I ended up getting Dan Scavino, the president's social media aide, was kind enough to bring a bunch of rosary beads into the meeting with the Pope. And there's a picture of it in the book. The Pope puts his hands on it and blesses it. And then a few weeks later, I got to bring my family, my mom, my wife, my kids to meet the Holy Father. And to me, that was a lesson in patience, in faith, and trusting God.
Everybody should read it. It's a
Thank
good
you.
read. Thank you. The Briefing with Sean Spicer. We're going to be right back after this. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
The story for tonight, send me a tweet at Martha McCallum using the hashtag #TheStory. We'll see you back here tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Tucker Carlson coming up next.
Well, good evening. Tucker Carlson tonight. Last week, we broke the story that CIA director and political extremist John Brennan, as well as other Obama officials, somehow retained their security clearances long after leaving their government jobs. This allowed them access to highly classified information, including leaks from former colleagues who are still working in the intel agencies. Today, the White House announced it is seeking to revoke those clearances. We'll have more on that in just a moment. But first, we finally have a copy of the FISA warrant application that allowed the Obama administration to spy on the Trump campaign in 2016. That document is heavily redacted, but certain facts are clear. The clearest of all, the Obama administration argued with a straight face that Carter Page was a secret agent working for the Russians. This is absurd, and yet it was widely believed in Washington. Watch this.
There was a very clear belief that Carter Page was conspiring with Russia in ways that were nefarious.
There was overwhelming evidence to have probable cause to do surveillance on Carter Page. It would have been a dereliction of duty for our FBI not to have sought a surveillance warrant.
As you say, it makes a compelling case that there is probable cause to believe that Carter Page was acting as an agent of a foreign power.
A compelling case, really? Well, if it's so compelling, why aren't we hearing that case in court at Carter Page's treason trial? Well, because it's total nonsense. It's a bad joke. The FISA application doesn't even begin to prove that Carter Page betrayed his country in any way. But the application does prove other things. We now know, for example, conclusively, that the discredited Steele dossier was central to the Obama administration's request to spy on the Trump campaign. Former FBI Director Jim Comey has publicly denied that, perhaps assuming the actual request would never be released. Comey claimed that the dossier was not a significant part of the government's request, and that turns out to be a lie. Not only did the Obama administration use the Steele dossier as the basis of its spying request, it appears the FBI did essentially nothing to verify the claims of the dossier, despite the fact they knew it was a partisan document paid for by political operatives, the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC. It was too good to check, apparently. Instead of sending its own agents to run down the facts, which of course it could have done, in fact it exists to do, the FBI instead cited a Yahoo News article to prove that the dossier was reliable. The only problem with that, the Yahoo piece was itself based on leaked information from Steele. You'd have to be utterly incompetent to do something like that, or totally dishonest. Meanwhile, the man identified by the Obama administration as a Russian agent walks free tonight. He is a living rebuke to this whole grotesque hoax. He is Carter Page, and he joins us live tonight. Carter Page, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
So this application repeatedly describes you as an agent of the Russian government, repeatedly. Are you aware of any criminal charges pending against you? Do you expect to be charged for working for the Russian government?
Not only am I not aware of it, Tucker, there's also the fact that no question I've ever been asked by the FBI in terms of any of these fake theories related to the dossier, as you're alluding to. None of those made any sense whatsoever. So there's not even a premise by which I could even conceivably be charged. So it's absolutely ridiculous.
And yet there are specifics from the dossier. Apparently, this comes from the dossier, but the application accuses you of meeting with two Russian officials, both named Igor Sechin and Igor Divyakin. Did you meet with either one of those men?
I never met with them in my life, ever. Yep.
Do you believe that that allegation comes from the Steele dossier?
Absolutely. It's funny, in July of 2016, 2 months before the Yahoo News article came out, I started getting these calls from various news reporters, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, all asking me about these same two names of people I've never even heard of in my, I had heard of Sechin, I never even heard of Divyakin. And so it was obvious, and some people told me from the media that they heard about it from the Clinton campaign, et cetera, but, so finally they found someone to put it out in 45 days before the election in Yahoo News,
So the Clinton campaign, of course, learned about it from Christopher Steele, whom they were paying to gather this dossier. And it's my understanding, too, from the testimony in recent months that Steele never visited Russia, never bothered to go to Russia as he assembled this dossier. Is that correct?
That's my understanding as well. And, There's a number of lawsuits going on, and Mr. Gubarev down in Southern District of Florida. So
Right.
hopefully
Whom we've
these civil, yes, I know. Hopefully these civil cases can get to the bottom of this. And it's
But
great.
yet at the same time, now we learn that in October of 2016, really at the height of the intensity of the presidential campaign, Christopher Steele, on the payroll of the Clinton campaign, briefs officials at the State Department, and that briefing apparently was used as one of the pretexts for spying on you. Am I connecting those dots correctly?
That's my understanding, Tucker. And, just based on this, these 400 plus pages of documents, there's a lot in there about media. It's sort of quoting a lot of media sources. And, I've talked with a couple of former assistant U.S. attorneys, et cetera, and no one has ever heard of anything like this in terms of this type of a court filing. It's just absolutely preposterous in terms of their sources. So.
One of the reasons I find this story so fascinating is because you are an actual person, an American, a Naval Academy graduate, and you're willing to talk in public. It's amazing to me that you have been the target of this surveillance and lived to tell the tale. You're not being charged, as you said, and I think you're probably right. What has it done to your life? How do you feel knowing that the federal government was spying on your personal life for a year?
Tucker, it's absolutely outrageous, but I have to say I'm very happy to have gotten the finally 14 months later the FBI answered my FOIA requests. This weekend we started having a little bit of transparency. Obviously there's 100 plus pages of blacked out information, and I think it's just starting the process in terms of getting to the real truth of these crimes that were committed against American democracy with this abusive process in the FISA court. So.
But really committed against you. I mean, your government, on the basis of no actual evidence, has accused you of treason and spied on you as a result. I mean, how does that, as someone who served your country in the military as a naval officer, how does that make you feel?
Well, my bigger concern is, there's obviously big problems in the U.S. Department of Justice. There are these false court pleadings, the false court pleadings that U.S. Attorney Berman has put in terms of my civil case against Broadcasting Board of Governors. But the bigger issue, which is my bigger concern, is the complete failure of the U.S. intelligence community in terms of looking at this Russia issue. If this is what they're using...
Well, it sounds like they succeeded, actually. I don't know if it's a failure. They had a very specific goal in mind, and they've achieved it. That's why we're talking about it today.
Yeah,
they've hamstrung the workings of government for a year and a half. Carter Page, you're a lot more forgiving than I would be in your position. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Tucker.
Alan Dershowitz is, of course, a professor emeritus at Harvard Law School. He's the author of The Case Against Impeaching Trump, and he joins us tonight. Professor, from what you have seen of this FISA application, what's your response?
Well, I think Congress ought to ask the people who drafted the FISA response why they deliberately left out the fact that the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee paid for the Steele dossier. That's question number one. Question number two, why did they, if they did, we don't know about the redactions, why did they leave out the fact that the dossier also had this salacious allegations about urination in beds, the kind of thing that would make any judge look very suspiciously on the source of the material. Instead, what they did is they said, this is a guy who had previously given them reliable information, without indicating that now it looks like he may be giving them very partisan and very unreliable information. So I think we need to get the answers to those questions before we can come to any firm conclusion.
I'm struck by the treatment that Carter Page has received in the press. Here's a guy who's not been charged with any crime. There's no credible evidence he betrayed his country. He's been accused of treason by his own government and spied upon, and yet the reservoir of sympathy for him seems very shallow. No one seems to care. Why is that?
Because in our partisan world, the presumption of innocence only applies to your side, not the other side. Democrats and people on the left get the presumption of innocence. They're prepared to argue that a search warrant is proof of guilt or an indictment is proof of guilt. For example, the indictment of the 12 Russians who will never be brought to trial is taken as containing the truth. They're just allegations. It may very well be that they're guilty, and we know there was intrusion or an attempt to intrude on the election, but we have to remember the presumption of innocence. It doesn't only apply to your side of the political spectrum.
That's exactly right. You really are the last liberal in America, and I'm glad that you're here. So recently, the creepy porn lawyer, the guy who's representing Stormy Daniels, said he knows about the contents of taped conversations between Donald Trump and his lawyer, Michael Cohen. You pointed out the obvious. If he knows what's inside, then he's able to obtain sealed information, and that's bad. Here's how you described it.
I do know there's more tapes of President Trump. There's multiple tapes of President Trump, number one.
How do you know there are other tapes involving the President of the United States? Are you privy to what was seized from the office? That's a very important question. I wish you'd answer it.
Well, Alan, I'm not going to answer your question because I don't have to answer your question.
If we're right, then you have access to information that's supposed to be sealed and supposed to be secret. How do you have that information? Well, you know, Avenatti answered it by... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, do you think he has the information?
Well, he's that or he's making it up. Look, he also accused me, to deflect from my very hard question, he accused me of making false predictions, whereas all of his predictions are correct. His major prediction in May was that President Trump would resign. We're waiting to see that happen. I predicted accurately what the Supreme Court would decide in the travel ban case. I predicted accurately who President Trump would nominate to the Supreme Court. All of my predictions have come true. And almost none of Avenatti's predictions have come true. Also, the American Bar Association had an article recently about the ethical concerns that lawyers, an ethics expert like Professor Stephen Gillers of NYU, have about Avenatti's conduct. So I think basically his conduct speaks for itself, and my predictions, look, you know, I wrote a book. You mentioned it before, The Case Against Impeaching Trump. In my book, the predictions are all in there. Anybody can read them. Anybody can see that I have been straight on. I've been accurate. The reason I'm accurate is because I don't have a partisan dog in this fight. I just call them as I see them. And sometimes my predictions help one side or help the other. But I'm not trying to make self-fulfilling prophecies the way Avenatti and others on the extreme side of this are making self-predicting, self-fulfilling prophecies. Let's wait to see if President Trump resigns. And if he doesn't, put Avenatti on the show. Confront him with that prediction. He not only made a prediction, he said, I guarantee you that President Trump will resign after hearing what Rudy Giuliani said and what Avenatti said. It's total nonsense.
We've invited him many times. So far, this is the only show he won't do.
We'll have him on
Professor,
with me.
thank you very much.
Have him on with me against each other. Good.
Anytime. I would love that. Thank you very much. Well, in the wake of our reporting last week, today the White House announced it is pursuing a revocation of security clearances for John Brennan and other former intelligence officials.
Not only is the president looking to take away Brennan's security clearance, he's also looking into the clearances of Comey, Clapper, Hayden, Rice, and McCabe. The president is exploring the mechanisms to remove security clearance because they've politicized and in some cases monetized their public service and security clearances.
Just minutes later, Jim Clapper, who is a liar, complained that this is all deeply unfair because he has a right to a security clearance. You can't take it away. Here he is on CNN.
This is kind of a petty way of retribution, I suppose, for speaking out against the president, which I think are on the part of all of us are born out of genuine concerns about President Trump.
Congressman Raul Labrador is a Republican. He represents the great state of Idaho, and he joins us tonight. Congressman, why do these guys have security clearances in the first place, and why do they feel entitled to have them?
That's a great question. So there's two issues that we have to address first. Is why do they have the security clearance at this time? And the reason they have it is in the past we have always extended it to people who were in these kinds of positions because they were of benefit to the government. Not because they were a benefit to themselves, but because the government could use their assistance during a transition or anything like that. Clearly, they're not benefiting the government right now. They're not benefiting this administration. But the second question, especially when you talk about Clapper and some of these other individuals, they have been found to lie to Congress. So it's interesting to me, why do they even have this extended security clearance?
I agree.
When they have already lied to the American people, and they have lied to the institutions that represent the American people.
Well, Clapper flat out lied to the Congress, and I don't understand why you all didn't hold him in contempt or prosecute him. What he did seems to me to be illegal. But leaving that aside, these guys work for cable news networks. I mean, they're much like I am. They are paid to talk on television. Wouldn't that disqualify them right there? Or do I get a security clearance too? And what are the rules here exactly?
That's a terrific question. So, like I said earlier, they have the security clearance to benefit the government. The moment that they start receiving money for the information that they have, the moment that they start monetizing the information that they have received from the government, they should no longer have the security clearance. And it's something that in this new age where we have cable news, where you have people moving from government to TV, is something that we need to rethink about extending these security clearances. I don't think they should be done automatically like we have done in the past with these high offices.
Yeah, I don't know why we would do it at all. I mean, Brennan is clearly unhinged. She's a political extremist. Isn't the point of the intel agencies to inform the executive so that he can make foreign policy decisions? Is there another reason we have these agencies? I thought that was their charter.
That is the only point that they have the security clearance. And that's why in the past we have extended security clearances to people who had high office, these security clearances in previous administrations, because they were helping the new administration with the information that they needed to receive. They were maybe instructing their replacements. They were working with them. But right now it's clearly that they have decided to be partisan. They have decided to become unhinged in many instances. To accuse the President of the United States of actual treason is something that needs to be really reconsidered, and we need to start thinking about why this individual has this high security clearance.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the deep state thing is real, but I can promise you the fact these guys have security clearances convincing half the country that it's real is bad just for that, I think. Anyway, Congressman, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Last week on this program, we reported, based on the accounts of two separate sources, that Democratic lobbyist Tony Podesta had been offered immunity in return for testifying against Paul Manafort. Well, today, a list of witnesses granted immunity in Manafort's trial in Virginia for tax and fraud violations was released. Podesta was not on that list because he has nothing to do with that case. According to our sources, Tony Podesta has been offered immunity to testify in Paul Manafort's trial in D.C., That's the trial on criminal FARA violations related to the lobbying both of them did on behalf of the government of Ukraine. Obviously, we'll continue to pursue that story as it unfolds. Well, the state of New York is so determined to keep immigrants in this country, even ones here illegally, they are pardoning convicted criminals in order to halt their deportation. Are they doing that for you? Probably not. That story's next.